Welcome to the Freebirth podcast, a supportive space for people who are learning, exploring, and celebrating their autonomous choices in childbirth. Together, we'll unpack truths, share personal stories, and claim our ability to birth freely and intuitively. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
Are you craving a community of like-minded women? Do you feel like an outsider in your family or your community? Well, I may have the place for you. We have a Freebirth Society private online community that's full of radical and wild women just like you. If you resonate with the topics that we explore on this podcast and want to belong in a circle of women who support each other in the self-exploration of free birth and wild mothering, come join us. You can apply online at our website, freebirthsociety.com. It's where myself and my team are hanging out these days, and we would love to get to know you. The word that comes to my mind when I think about this week's guest is refreshing. Sabali is a true inspiration to me with her deep sense of self and no bullshit attitude. In Sabali's first birth, she was literally abandoned by her birthing team during her home birth, and therefore eventually transferred herself to find support. So when she got pregnant with her second child, she was already highly attuned to what did and didn't feel right. So halfway through her second pregnancy, she left her providers in the system and prepared for her free birth on her own terms.
I would say it does start hearing my birth from my mother. And, I'm the oldest of four. I was born in New York City, in Harlem. And, just regular standard. Now, I will say, being born in the 80s, they were introducing new medical techniques to pregnancy. And so my mother did say, I think it was me or was it with my sister? Me and my sister only 13 months apart.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Irish twins. That I one of us, she was losing a lot of blood, and she was saying that she was actually going into shock, and she kind of saw her life leaving her. No, with me, that's what it was. My birth was that I was like, she was in hard labor, she says, for like 2 weeks straight, and she still was able to birth all her children vaginally. Those were things that were important to her, and also what was important to her was being able to breastfeed. And so I always had that kind of understanding on like vaginal birth and stuff like that. Very basic, but according to my mother, it was very important that she did those things. So outside of her being in labor for like just 2 weeks, and it was this back-to-back craziness, um, clearly she was able to birth easily in that regard. So I always took for granted my fertility, and I never, I was over 35 and I hadn't had a child yet, and so people were like, "Oh, well, and I just never gave into that thought. My paternal grandmother, she didn't get married until she was 36, and then she had 9 children.
Oh
So
my God.
yeah. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna be good. Like, if, I'm
Yeah.
gonna be good till I'm 45. And maybe it's more of a mentality than anything, but I just said that's not gonna be me. I'm not gonna have issues with that. You know, so finally, my husband, I was doing some intern work out in LA because I'm a chef, and I was doing some work out there. And my husband kept saying, "You need to come back. We live here in Texas." And he's like, "You need to come back. We were supposed to get pregnant before you left." All this other stuff. So he was very much by the book. So all my children have been planned because I know my fertility. I know when I ovulate. It was just like clockwork in that regard. And it was kind of cool because I hear so many things about people who didn't know that they were pregnant. And I'm like, how do you not know you're pregnant? But you know, so my first one was planned, and I purposely planned her well, I didn't know if it was a her or him, but I purposely planned to get pregnant in the summertime so that I can have a winter baby, because it's hot as hell where we live.
Mhm.
And I was like, I'm
Smart.
not, yeah, everybody said that's the worst experience. And well, I
Oh.
found that out with baby number two,
Oh,
but
no.
but at least the first one, I said, I'm gonna have this baby on my terms the way I could. And so I did. I had a wonderful pregnancy. I still, went to yoga. I didn't have morning sickness. One time I remember serving my husband dinner and I got nauseated to the point I had to go to sleep. That was it. Everything else was great. So I was like, this is amazing. So I was feeling a little bit like I had too much confidence. I guess I was waiting for the shoe to drop, saying it can't be this easy. I'm not doing something right. When I hear all the stories of like preeclampsia and high blood pressure, this and like, gestational diabetes, I'm like something's gonna happen. And so I found a midwife. We were looking for midwives, and unfortunately, in our area, there might be maybe two black midwives, maybe two, and you know how big it is here, and that was really sad. I didn't need my midwife to be black per se, but I did need to have a decent connection,
Of
and
course.
I connected with one midwife, and she was nice. She was educator, which I love because I always had a lot of questions, and she always helped me with that. But I always had this feeling that she didn't 100% believe in the process of birth. But it was this little feeling in the back of my head. And what do I know? It was my first birth, my first pregnancy. I don't know anything. So I just had to um, put my faith and everything into her hands. But I
Mm.
kept thinking, like, well, if birth just happens, like I do know women on the continent of Africa birth with like just them and their mother or, somebody of the village. And they do this all the time without
On
all,
all continents.
yeah, yeah, on all continents, not just like, but just the
Yeah.
continent. Not everybody's running to the hospital.
Right.
And so, she would be like, oh, well, if this happened, we would have to go to the hospital. Oh, if this happened, we would have to transfer. And I'm
Mm.
like, well, one, we're not even there yet. So why are you
Right.
potentially bringing up these scenarios?
And was this a
Um,
home birth midwife?
Yes. So the
Okay.
goal was to have a home birth. We weren't going to do like a birth center or anything like that. So I wanted to do a pool. And I didn't even actually want to do like a water birth. I was just always told that laboring in the water was very comforting. So I had envisioned that I would labor in the water and then get out, blah, blah, blah. And well, long story short, it comes to the week, and I was at the movies with my husband, and I felt like a little pop at the top of my belly, and I
Whoa.
was like, "What is that noise?" It literally sounded like a little like balloon pop, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And then maybe 20 minutes later, I felt like a little gush. Now the gush felt more like it felt like discharge
Yeah.
because I went to the restroom and I saw that my seat was wet, but there was nothing else. There was like, no more water was coming out. And, of course, in my thinking, everything goes like I was always told it's either it's going to be a gush and pop, like clearly your membranes have burst, or that it was going to be a trickle.
Mhm.
So I said, okay, well, let's see what's going on. And we stayed out like 5 hours later. So I didn't have any trickle or anything. So I'm like,
Wow.
clearly that must have been like just things are getting going. I don't know. Right. So I disregarded. And then not in retrospect, you need to go with your first mind, right?
Mhm.
I contacted my doula, who I had more faith in my doula than my midwife. And
Aw.
I told her what I felt. I told her what happened. And she, being my doula, it's like, you should tell your midwife. And that's where I realized was the mistake. I should have never told my midwife. So I did.
Aw.
And
No,
so,
no, you should have told your
yeah,
midwife. Just the
absolutely.
midwife it shouldn't have had negative repercussions.
Yeah, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And you find this all out at the
Oh,
end, but
bummer.
I contacted her, and true to form, she's like, "Well, it sounds like your water's broken, and if this happened this long ago, then you have to go to the hospital." Like,
What?
how the hell do you just start off right there? Like, that's what she says. Like, we
Oh, I've
have to go
seen
to the
so many
hospital,
midwives do that.
you
Such a
know? And so I then like that that started the psychological assault.
Mhm.
So then I'm like terrified, like, no, I don't want to go to the hospital. We worked so hard. Why am I having to go to the hospital? And that's what started the whole downward spiral. So I at that point though, I told her, but I'm not feeling anything. Like I'm not having contractions. I'm not having tightness. Like that's just what happened. So the next, she's like, okay, well, just go to bed, see me the next day and let's see. I could do a test to see if it has been your actual membrane, blah, blah. So then what did happen, I started experiencing bloody show, I guess. And I told her, "Oh, I'm starting to have some bloody discharge." And she's like, again, I think at this point, these are still just via text message. She's like, "Yeah, I think we definitely have to go to the hospital." And I'm starting to get pissed now. Like, you haven't seen anything. Why are you saying off the bat, let's go to the hospital? Why are
Also,
you doing
don't
this?
call yourself a home birth midwife.
Yeah, no.
Ugh.
I I realize part of it's a money situation too, and it's easy because she was a white midwife, so I'm a woman of color. What the hell do I know what's going on with my body? Oh, X, Y, Z, and I didn't know about all that beforehand. It's like, of course, after I have my birth, that's when all this information comes out. But it is what it is. So I go to
Mm.
the house, I do that little swab test, and the little test, and I guess they check the alkalinity of the fluid, and it's like, oh, yep, it's something. I forgot what it was. She's like, yeah, it looks like we're gonna have to go to the hospital. So X,
Okay,
Y, and Z.
actually, it looks like you're beginning labor.
Yeah,
Like amniotic fluid and bloody discharge means that you're beginning labor.
yeah, and I don't know. I think maybe I was 2 centimeters at that point, and so she's like, "Yeah, we're gonna have to." So, and I drove to her home to do this. So I'm driving back home, completely upset. I'm
Oh,
crying, and that was the beginning of this massive flood that we were about to experience. It's called like the tax flood. So it's starting to rain in the beginning of this historical tax flood that we had. And
no.
I'm driving down the street. It's raining and pouring. I'm crying and pouring, and then I get home and then she texts me or calls and says she spoke to another midwife and the other midwife said, oh, that amniotic fluid also, not the amniotic fluid, but the pH balance of blood is also similar. And since I had that much bloody show, that it probably wasn't, because the thing is, she saw the bag, so from her angle, the bag was still intact. So it didn't look like that, my bag had broken. That this is just like, the cervix starting to change and widening. And that's the pH balance is from that fluid. And the bag is probably still encased. So she's like, yeah, you don't have to worry about it. But for me, the damage was done.
Totally.
And so it was interesting in retrospect, I was not able to recover from that initial experience.
Yeah.
No matter all the crazy things that happened the next 3 days, I wasn't able to recover from it. And so I had some relief, like, oh, finally. And then, that's when, like, it's raining now, it's monsooning here. And like, I'm starting to have like surges, and I'm really big on hypnobirthing. So I was really trying to get into my hypnobirthing and the surges and stuff. But my surges overall, and I was in that state from Sunday to Thursday. That's how I was. My surges I never had a pattern. They never normalized. They would just come and go. They would get short, and then they were long, and then, but regardless of that, throughout all of that, I kept saying, this is normal, right? Like, you could do this, right? Like, isn't this
Totally.
how it works? Especially in the first one, I always say that it's longer and there's nothing typically normal. And then that thing with normal, there's a
Mm.
range in normal. So
Huge.
the huge range. So they're doing, they're taking my test, they're taking the test of the baby, checking our heart rate. All our rates are fine, our vitals are coming back. So I'm just like, okay, cool. I don't know what to expect. So long story short on that, they weren't, my midwife nor my doula was able to come out to the house on Monday because it literally was flooded everywhere.
Whoa.
And then maybe by Tuesday afternoon, they got here. So they get here Tuesday afternoon. I'm basically been in that state of just kind of surging all night and random craziness surging. And I remember at one point I was at least 5, and they said, "Oh, we could see the hair," and I actually was able. I touched, I felt the hair, I felt Kamaria's head, I felt everything, and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, this might happen." And it just everything just slowed down. It just slowed down, and so she tried to give me things to encourage me to progress and stuff like that. And long story short, what happened was on Wednesday, she basically came to my husband and said, "Listen, we can't continue this. She's been at this state too long. She's in prodromal, I guess that's what it's called, and she's having failure to progress. And I'm recommending you guys go to the hospital, and you're saying X, you're not." So she wrote out this crude contract saying, "I've basically released my client. I'm telling her that she needs to go to the hospital. She's deciding X, Y, and Z."
What a
Yeah,
shit midwife, man.
yeah,
And like, oh, really? You're suggesting I go to the hospital for the 25th time? Got it. Like
yeah, yeah,
she's
yeah,
been
yeah. And I'm
suggesting.
like, you've been suggesting this
Yeah.
since like 6 months ago,
Yeah, exactly.
basically. And
Damn.
that's I'm like, I didn't want to be responsible for something that I didn't know. But now I understand it was in me. I just needed to properly educate myself. But fool me once.
Well, and I mean, but to be fair to yourself, what most first time women who have never gone through birth want a woman around.
Mhm.
And it is no fault of yours that, the woman that you chose to be with you freaking sucked, and totally let you down. Like she's positioned as the person that's going to be great to have with you. I was wondering, why if you said there was 2 Black midwives in the area, why did you go? Did you just not connect with them and you connected with the other one more? Or?
Yeah, so the first one, she lived kind of further out, and they were saying that was one thing they were saying, like, you don't want a midwife that's too far out. And I would have probably gone with her, but they were like, "Oh, it's best to try to find somebody that's like within 20 minutes."
Had I known I was gonna have a week-long labor, I could have had
Yeah, I
her
could have
go.
I could have definitely gone there and do that. And then also that was the other thing. They were saying, I don't know if this is a personal well, I don't know. Maybe it's something with birth centers. The birth centers have this rule where your first birth have to be at a birth center. Like they don't want to do first time moms at home.
Oh, so the midwives were not home birth midwives for you, the 2 Black ones that were available?
Yeah, they have their birth centers and they travel out, but something there's a rule that they like first
Interesting.
time moms,
Gotcha. That's so gross. Okay.
yeah, yes, that first time moms need to be at the birth center or whatnot. And
Weird.
so
So that
I'm
it's
like,
easier to transfer you? Yeah.
yeah, I guess I mean that's part of the lay of the land, right? And if you're ignorant in how your body works and how birthing works, I mean, all they got to do is fearmonger you and say like, "Oh my God, you almost died," and so of course, then you're like, "Yes, transfer me." So yeah, so after, I mean, immediately after we signed that bullshit paperwork and she
Wow.
left my house, that was the first time I was able to like breathe and I felt
Mm,
calm.
wow.
Now, at this point, I don't have anybody checking on me and the baby, so I don't know what I'm so calm about. But I knew, like, every time I started to get upset, I would have a contraction. And I knew that didn't make any sense. I mean,
Mm.
literally, when I heard something bad news, I started to contract. And I'm like, that's not how contractions are supposed to work.
And did your doula stay with you?
So she stayed with me up until a certain point because I don't know about doula certifications and all this stuff, but she had said that she had to leave when the midwives left because something about her certification. And so she did not want to be responsible if something went bad and then she's here. So
So
at this point,
let me get this straight. So you hire a doula and a midwife for your home birth, and then during your home birth, they both abandon you because you want to home birth.
yes, because I wasn't progressing. But at that point, the midwife is like, "You're not progressing fast enough." And I'm like, "Bitch, this is not a 9 to 5 job." Like
Oh,
literally the sun is starting to set and it's kind of like she's like, "Listen, this
right.
shouldn't be taking this long." I'm like, "What
And
do you mean this shouldn't be taking this
right.
long?"
And you're fine. It's
Yeah,
not like there was some
that was my biggest thing because I'm not going to be one of those people who, like, if I'm like, oh, maybe I'm in a vicarious condition and maybe I can push it. We were fine. I felt fine. I
right.
just wasn't going anywhere. So, long story short, the next morning, like, I finally was able to get like
Mm.
3 hours of sleep, and that's when I start feeling the contractions again. And like at 4 or 5, my water officially broke, and there was no question. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
no, yeah, right. So we're like, okay. And I tell my husband, let's go, let's go. And my husband, love him. He's like, oh, we can do this ourselves. Let's go out in the backyard on a banana leaf. I'm like, no. At this point, I'm emotionally exhausted, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
I just want to go to the hospital. Just let them do whatever. And
Aw.
I'm like, and also that I decided to go to a county hospital. I'm like, I don't even want to go to a Cadillac hospital. I just want to be like rolled in, a short from a C-section. Let's just do this.
So when your water's open, why is that the why are you like, let's go to the hospital?
So, oh, thank you. So this is my ignorance on what the situation was. They scared the bejesus out of me of like, oh, when your water breaks, you only have 12 hours. You need 12 hours to get there to birth and blah, blah, blah. So had I woken up the next morning and my water was still intact, I would have still probably gone with the flow. But for me, especially that's why she was pushing that a week ago, why I needed to go. I was under the impression like, oh my goodness, my water breaks. I have to go. So that was my own personal ignorance, and that was a call that I made at that point. I'm like, okay, we're just going to the hospital. Water's broken. Let's go.
Meaning
So,
like let's have somebody keep eyes on us. Cuz
well,
obviously if your water broke and the midwife was still there, you would have
oh
taken
yeah,
care.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So just like
absolutely.
for someone to monitor you guys to make sure you're okay basically.
Yeah, at that point, I feel like, okay, well, labor is probably now labor. The baby's going to be here very shortly, right?
Gotcha.
Because of I'm already been surging on and off for the last 4 days, and now finally the water's broken, so the baby should be
Oh,
here.
tough mama. That is not an easy birth. Wow.
Yeah, I'm telling you, hypnobirthing. I'm like, I just believe in the surge. So I'm very grateful for the hypnobirthing because I wanted to be able to mentally still be in the game, and that's why I did hypnobirthing. It gave me those tools. So we get to the hospital. It's standard. They're putting their finger in me. Yes, you're in active labor.
Oh,
Or no,
thanks.
maybe I was like 5 or 6. No, your bag is the water is broken. We're gonna get you a room. Um, Everything was normal. I would say what happened was at this point, I'm not progressing because I'm on their time now. And they're like, okay, we got to get you some medicine. And, I just played. My husband wasn't there because poor thing, he was so tired. He wasn't there yet because he had to park the car. And it was just one of those big
Mhm.
conglomerate hospitals. And I kept saying like, "Oh, I'm so tired. I can't make these decisions. My husband can make these decisions." And I know how my husband is. He's like, "No medicine." I know he's worse than me. So I just kept saying, "Oh, let my husband let him." Oh. So at this point it's like 1:30 and they're like, "Listen, you've been here since like 5 o'clock this morning. You still have no pitocin. You still have nothing. I had like saline solution or something." They're like, "We have to get this going." So I'm like, oh, okay, okay, fine. So I'm like, what's the smallest amount of Pitocin that you can give me? And I was grateful they worked with me. So I guess they give you Pitocin every so often. I don't know what the schedule is, but I would ask the nurse, can we skip it this time? She's like, yeah. Like, so they really worked with me. So long story short, in this particular, county hospital, they actually had midwives, and I didn't know that. And so my husband had my birth plan, and he was at the nurse's station talking to the OB about my birth plan, and a midwife happened to walk by him. And he's like, the midwife was smart enough to say, okay, regular people don't have birth plans because OBs don't give a shit about a birth plan. And so she came to him and said, I'm a midwife. I'm available. Would you guys like to birth with me? And because of what happened the other day, I was a little hesitant to go with another midwife and all the shit that I had been going through. But my husband convinced me and I said yes. And it turned out amazing. She was an amazing midwife, but I still didn't understand what it means to be a midwife under a medical umbrella. So she was like the best possible medical midwife, right? And but she was amazing. I wind up still having vaginal birth, but I wind up tearing. I tore a lot. And now I realize because I was told to push and I was very anti pushing. But at this point, I'm like, why am I pushing? Why am I doing these things? Like, I shouldn't need to do that. So, but we had Kamaria vaginally. And, my biggest issue was that I wind up tearing. But I love that midwife. She's an amazing midwife. But I just understood now. Now I'm in a pace of like, yeah, I'm never going to do that again.
You
So
pushed you pushed on
yeah,
your back.
so they had the bed kind of all the way like slightly vertical. So I was
Mhm.
kind of like in a deep squat, but I was still like on my back. I wasn't just free. And then, I'm like, my body's gonna push her out. Why am I having to push? And I'm like, come on, push, mama. And I even in that point, I still go back to that. I don't agree with that. And I was right not to agree
Mm.
with that.
Aw. And
So,
did you get an epidural?
no, 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 no epidural, none of that shit,
Wow. You were
and
just on pit. That's
yeah,
hardcore.
and the smallest amount possible because they let me like cut my dosage once and then they skipped one round and then so yeah, it was just a small amount. So it was great. So here it is. My husband's like, now that Kamari is like moving and grooving and she's growing and having a good time. My husband's looking at me like, okay, well, it's now for another baby. And I'm like, I want to give my body an opportunity to heal and stuff like that. And he's like, okay, you said that back in September. It's now November. Not in,
Oh, baby hungry, your husband.
yeah, well, I realize men have a biological clock too. So I said, okay, fine, fine. And I said, that means I'll be pregnant during the summertime here. And I said, every ounce of it, you're gonna get it. You're gonna get it too. You're so gonna get it too. So I had a relatively good pregnancy with him. I did have like one bout of major morning sickness that turned into like it was like I think I got food poisoning induced
Ugh.
morning sickness, and then after that I never had any other issues again. Nothing after that. So that was pretty cool. Of course, it was hot as hell, big as hell. Just my feet are swelling like sweet potatoes, but everything is fine. And I decided I was like, okay, well, we have decent insurance. I'm going to go to this midwife, this practicing group of midwives that's in a hospital and let the insurance deal with that. So the best of both worlds. I get there and I'm starting to feel the red flags again. Like there's like maybe six of them. I don't get to see the same ones each
Mm.
time. I'm kind of feeling this one, definitely not feeling this one. I'm telling this one how I feel. She's telling me, no, that's not how it feels. And I'm like, no, no, no. So I'm like, okay, let's just try to ride this out. And then we get to the glucose test. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so last time I did my own monitoring, I did my own finger pricking, everything. And so they're like, okay, well, you have to take this googly gop in this bottle. And I'm like, what is that? Like, what is in here? And they can't tell me what's in there. They don't know what the ingredients are. And I'm like, you're going to also tell me that there's not an alternative test, which I know you can. I hear a lot of people. The point is, you need to have the same amount of sugar in your system for this long. No, we don't offer any alternative tests. We don't offer it. And I didn't. I got. And I think this is my age and coming to maturity. I'm not here to educate you sometimes. I don't give a shit anymore. I just don't need to do this anymore. Like
Totally.
before, I would have been like X, Y, and Z. And I'm
Mhm.
just like, okay, all right. So then they called me and like, okay, we need to do another. I'm like, you know what? My new midwife will be requesting my paperwork
Mm.
from you. I didn't even care anymore. And then at this point though, I am like 27 weeks and I'm like, okay, well, what the hell am I going to do? Like, I got to try to find a midwife. And so at that time, I decided to do a hypnobirthing refresher class with my first doula, because my first doula, she was awesome. She wound up coming to the hospital with me the next day and all that with Kamaria. But I found out that she currently was pregnant too. We were basically around the same time. And when she came to the house, I was like, "Oh, you're pregnant?" I was like, "So what are you guys gonna do? Who's your midwife?" And she's like, "You know what? I'm just like me and I forgot her husband's name. We're just gonna do this ourselves." And I was like, "What do you mean you're gonna do this yourself?" And she's like, "Oh, me and my husband are just gonna do it ourselves." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, there's like a lot of people who do it." And in all fairness, I remember one time being on Facebook and I just sent out a message saying, does anybody have recommend uh, a midwife? Like, have any midwife's recommendation? And I knew one woman, and I thought it was facetious. She's like, "What do you need a midwife? I had both my sons at home by myself. Me and my husband just pulled it out, da da da." And I just wanted to roll my eyes that hard. I'm like, "Bitch, please, ain't nobody gonna do all that." But now I understand what she means. So yeah, so I was like, oh, okay. So she had sent me information on some women who did consultations on things like that, but they didn't get back in time. They didn't get back in touch with me in a timely fashion. So then I said, okay, well, what does it mean to have an unassisted birth? And so I was fortunate to find this really well done Kindle book on this woman who had an unassisted birth. And it was very like plain Jane, cut to the point. This is what she did and how she applied for the birth certificate afterwards, blah, blah, blah. And then she had multiple children. And I was like, okay, that was my first foray. And then I was like, okay, let me continue to do some information. And at this point, I think I had a conversation with my husband, and I said, "Listen, I think I'm going to do this by myself." And that's when he was just like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, I think I could do this on my own." He's like, "I'm not a midwife," and I was like, "You know what? You're not a midwife, and that's a good question. So, what does that mean?" That's when I started doing research, and I came across the Freebirth Society and Indie Birth and a few other people. And I reached out to you for consultation,
Mhm.
and the consultation and going back and doing some research, and then we had a follow up. And basically, what I was able to walk away with a very sound understanding is that, as what was presented with my first birth, that if these potential situations presented themselves during the labor or after the labor, my midwife would have to transfer me to the hospital.
Mm.
She would have to call 911. And I'm like, well, why am I paying you all that much money for you to simply do the same thing, to call 911 for
Yeah.
us to have to, like, I came to the realization that, outside of, also, I was very fortunate of finding someone to hold birth space with me who also truly believed in the power of birth and in being able to do this on your own. But in the event these situations presented itself, this is what you do. And so when I, look back on his birth, I realized what I was really confronting was fear. So what happened was, after like around 27, 28 weeks, I made the decision to do a free birth unassisted at home, and I decided not to tell anybody. I told
Except for
nobody
me.
except for except for you. My husband kind of knew because I thought I might have to just fake like
Oh,
spontaneous birth
right.
with him.
I
Yeah,
remember that.
yeah.
You didn't super tell him your plan.
No, I didn't, because my husband is super analytical and it's not his fault, but he was asking questions that I did not have answers to.
Hmm.
And at this point, it was kind of like, just believe the process and believe me. Sometimes that's not good enough for certain people. And
Mhm.
I have his baby in my life, and the life of the baby in my hand, and I just walk away saying, "Okay, believe you." Like he's like, "Okay, I need a little bit more. What what is X, Y, and Z? What is da 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 da?" So I did give him some paperwork to read. He was under the impression, like, similarly to what happened last time, what you need to do to be there to help me. So the day that the baby actually came, I remember about 3 days beforehand, I was laying kind of like in a vertical, I was laying on my back, but I was propped up. And I guess now what happened was his head went into like the birth canal, like really like first, second degree,
Mhm.
because I felt like a bump against my cervix. It was like boom. I was like, oh, what is that?
Mhm.
And at that point, I was still taking my daughter to school. Everything was still normal. And I realized that we in America put so much emphasis on the labor, on the pregnancy, and we never focus on the fourth trimester. And I was very grateful of listening to the Freebirth class. And you had Kimberly Johnson on there, and I got that book and I devoured it. I absolutely loved it, and I recommend it to everyone. The fourth trimester, because that's really how we go south. You go, as we say, go from sugar to shit like that, because that fourth trimester can really kick your ass. And it for me at that point, I was so comfortable knowing what my birth was going to be like. I just started focusing on the fourth trimester. So
Mhm.
I just focused on, okay, what is it going to look like? Who's going to come to help me? Da 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 da. I didn't even think about like the labor and stuff. So the day he comes, I'm at like I'm getting my daughter's lunch ready, and I feel a surge, and I have to kind of like say, I have to focus. I have to breathe in. I have to do some deep, just mental focusing on that to work its way through. And my husband said, "Okay, I think the baby might be coming." And so we thought, given what happened with Kamaria, it definitely was going to be like that Friday or the weekend. So I,
Wait,
so
also, sorry, quick question.
okay, yeah.
Um, didn't you have a doula this time?
Oh, I did. That's right. I forgot. So I
I
had
feel
a
like maybe I introduced you guys?
Yeah, so actually, so what happened was
I
I
can't
had a
remember.
doula in the beginning. Very sweet girl. I had a doula. And what happened was, after I devoured all of this like free birth doula, radical doula, I was like, this woman is not up to par.
Mm.
And it was like, I felt so bad because she's so sweet, but I was like, I need a doula who truly understands this, where I'm going now. Like, I need someone who's comfortable in not a hospital, at a home setting, yet
Mhm.
alone there's not going to be a midwife there. And
Mhm.
so, there was no hard feelings, because obviously she respects the mother's wishes. But I think it does say something for her. How, if you are a doula, all of your experience is only in a hospital, I mean, everybody has their work, but I feel like you need to be a little bit more, your exposure to birthing needs to be all the in between: hospital, home, midwife, no midwife, OB. Like, to have a better experience to help a mom. So what happened was, yes, you sent out a call asking, like, is anybody, available to hold space for a mom in the Houston area. And yeah, and so what happened is, she reached out to me, and she's an absolutely amazing doula. Also, she's pregnant now, and she's asked me to hold birth space for her. So I really,
Oh, that's
yeah.
so sweet. And how is she birthing?
She's gonna do like what I'm doing. She's got an OB, and then just, oh my God, spontaneous.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
That's how it happens. So yeah, so I wind up meeting with her. And so one thing is that, my husband, I met let he had to meet with her because he had a lot of questions, and he wanted to know what this looked like, and he needed to feel comfortable too. And he did, because she's awesome. And he just was like, you know what? I think you are in good hands. We can do this. Like, I can walk away saying that my wife, Sabali, is with her and this is going to be a good situation. So the morning of, I just had a major surge. It was only that one surge. That was my first time experiencing a surge like that, because every other time, I just drank some water because I was like, oh, I'm just slightly dehydrated. So my husband takes the kiddo off to school. I meet with my doula. She comes in. We're just sitting, talking, having a good time, drinking tea. And she asked me if, could she give me a massage, because I was experiencing significant swelling on my feet. And then she's like, oh, and I could do some like acupressure for like, labor. And I told her yes. I'm like, sure, you could try whatever you want. It's fine. So she leaves. I then made myself like a nice lunch, and I'm eating my lunch, and I get on the phone. I'm talking to my sister-in-law. And at this point, I'm like, okay, well, I can't, I got to get ready to go pick up my daughter. It's about like 2:15, 2:20. And I feel like another surge. And I tell my sister-in-law, I'm going to have to call you back. I'm like, I really need to call you back. So I'm like, oh my goodness, like, am I feeling indigestion? Do I have to go to the restroom? Like, what's going on? And at 2:31, I called my husband at work and I said, you know what? I don't think I could pick up Kamaria today. The way I feel, I just don't feel right being on the road. And like, if I have a surge, I'll have to like pull over, because at this point, the surges are like, what, one every 5 hours, but they were pretty intense. So I'm just like, okay, let's just not. Why take a chance? The baby's probably going to come like on Friday or something. Why take my chance? So I, no, I said, okay. So I get off the phone with my husband, and it's like 2:40, and I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to go take a shower, and I'm going to call my doula back, because she was off that day. She doesn't live very far. And I was saying, I'm going to take a shower. I'm going to see if she can come back and simply just like give me a brief massage. So I get in the shower and I text her and I was like, hey, do you think you can be back in a little while? I think, I think I just need like some back massages. I'm going to take a nap. And she's like, okay, sure. Um, so I get in the shower. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that's like a sizable surge. And that's when like I'm feeling my body finally starting to dilate. I could feel the dilation. And that was the part that was so cool, that I didn't get to experience any of that, because I was so in my head last time and all that crazy shit. But
Yeah.
this time I could feel my cervix pulling, and it's like every time it pulls, like more bloody show is coming down. It's like
Wow.
plop, 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 plop. I'm like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe this. And so that was like so cool. I did that for about a good maybe 10, 15 minutes, because at this point I realized like I had to get out of the shower and go to the front door to open the front door for my doula.
Mm.
So I get out the shower, I walk, I hobble over there, open the door, and then we're walking our way back. And she's like, I have another surge in the living room. And then we make our way back to the shower. So finally, she's like looking at me and she's like, yeah, I think I'm going to set up your birth supply. So, she pulls out all the stuff and I'm just like in the shower. Then I get out of the shower and I'm just like laying over the shower. And I feel that it was like maybe 5 surges. And of course, this time I said, I will not be pushing. I do not believe in pushing. This baby knows how to come on his or her own. And that's exactly what happened. Like one thing that I was very grateful for was the counter pressure that she did on the small of my back. That made it so manageable. It was just like, it wasn't that big of a deal at that point. I feel like it was maybe 5 times I had that experience, and then like she could see the head. He was coming down, and he was in cold. So I reached down and I could feel the sack. I could feel his little head in the sack.
Hmm.
And the last surge felt like it took like forever because I was kind of squatted and I was just waiting and waiting and waiting. So then finally the last surge came, and when he came with that, that was kind of like a sizable one, and he when he came out, he hit the floor or whatnot. Like, you know, yeah, I was, and I say hit the floor, but he was like maybe 2 inches above the floor from where we were, and that's when the sack actually popped or whatnot, and he was all
Wow.
crying. But it was just amazing. It truly was an amazing experience, and I loved. And then after that, I guess I had experience early in the pregnancy, some type of sub hemorrhage, something is some type of technical term. And so when I thought the placenta came out, it was actually like some of the, I guess, the tissue mass from the
Mm.
hemorrhage came out. But other than that, I think maybe I birthed the placenta 20 minutes afterwards. And so here I am, I'm holding him. He latches on immediately. He let us know that he was here. He was not happy. And like that's when I can hear my husband's truck roll in, and he told, my daughter, it's like the baby's coming. Because again, we thought like with Kamaria's birth, this was gonna take a while. And he like walks in and he sees us in the bathroom on the floor.
Oh
He's
my
like,
God.
yeah, he's like, what's going on? And I'm like, and I show him, he's like, the baby is here?
Oh my I never realized this whole time of 8 months, I never realized he wasn't there for the birth.
Yeah, no, he was at work because we really was like, because because if had I called him at like noon to say, oh no, it's going down, you need to be here, he would have left work and all this stuff. But we really was just like, oh yeah, it's probably going to be Thursday night or Friday
Mhm.
or something like that. It literally was like what 45 minutes because I called him at
Wow.
2:31. They came in at like 3:35, and I was already holding the baby nursing.
Oh my goodness. Oh, and thank God your doula made it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And she was, I feel like now I'm like, maybe that acupressure she was doing really kind of set things in motion. But, um, but yeah, it was just like, I was able to just like let my body just birth.
Mhm.
Like I didn't really need to do anything. I didn't need to, other than that's why I did the hypnobirthing because, you know, when you're having that sensation, it can be alarming. And so therefore you don't want just the fear to set in. And then now you're kind of scared for what I just wanted to allow my body to do its thing and not let my mind get all in it because I know what happens when my mind gets all in it. And yeah, so that's kind of how it was. It was, and it
Wow.
was really, really wonderful. And that's when I'm like, maybe I want to do this again. Um, and so I don't really go around telling too many people about it because I don't think a lot of people even understand, like, what do you mean you didn't go to the hospital? What do you mean
Mm.
you didn't have a midwife? That's I was there too. It's kind of hard to wrap your brain around it. It's so
Mm.
unfortunate in this society, but just even now, so because of this, and I had told you, I had launched my own prenatal village here, and so I've had some women that have come in that I've talked to, and just being more of a reference because I think not a lot of women are going to do an unassisted birth,
Right.
but there's still so much information to glean from unassisted birth that still
Mhm.
empowers a regular hospital birth. So,
Totally.
I've been fortunate to be able to share that story with women and being able to let them know. And so even with my doula from the first one who did my hypnobirthing refresher class, I recently saw her after all these months. And, I let her know, it's like, you're the reason why I decided that I was going to do a free birth. And I realized like talking to you let me also understand I need to go with my first mind. My first
Mm.
mind told me that I don't need to do this and I'm not going to compromise myself and I'm not
Mm.
going to compromise for other people's feelings. And that's why I didn't tell my mom, I didn't tell my sister, I didn't tell anybody,
Wow.
and I didn't want to tell people and especially them and they'll be like, "Oh, we're going to be praying for you and we're going to I just I don't need fear projection.
Yeah.
Like, so I just left it. The only other person outside of was my children's pediatrician. I did let them know because I'm very, very good friends with her. And she also is a believer of a holistic, natural approach to things. So I did tell
Mhm.
her, like, this is what I'm going to do. Because I also think from her perspective as a doctor, she also needs to know that women do this.
Right?
Like, like we're all women do have babies on their own term and on their own account and things like that. And I wind up getting his, uh, birth certificate like 4 months later and stuff. Because of it, I really took a very like fuck the system type of approach. Like, why do I need to go do all of this right now? I don't have to
Mhm.
do all of this. But they make you feel like you have to get this work done. You have to get this paperwork done. And we need to get this like testing done. If I held my baby and after a day or two was looking bad, he was limp, he wasn't doing X, Y, and Z, I would have immediately gone to the doctor.
Of
Like I
course.
you know but
Yes, of
he
course.
was perfectly fine. But sometimes, like, well, you don't know. I think I do know. I
Right.
know a little bit more because at the end of the day, unless it's something drastic, everything else would have been fine. And
Yeah.
he's perfectly fine. And
Yeah.
yeah, we're
Mm.
doing well. But yeah, it's so fun. It's so great. It really is. I love telling my birth story to the point where like my husband loves telling my birth story for me. And then like I walk into the room and I could tell he's told my birth story because people are looking at me like, "Oh my goodness, this woman is amazing. You did what? Oh
Mm.
my god!"
That's cute.
Yeah.
Amazing. So good. I love your story. It's
Oh
just,
yeah.
it's just like it's so powerful. It's so embodies self-authority,
Yeah.
and it's so simple.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things where it is so simple. And I know that for certain women, it's just not going to be for them, and it doesn't have to be. But I will say that I think we really need to talk about like fear. Like fear has such a crippling effect on so much. And for me, that's what my this free birthing was.
Mhm.
I was free birthing fear. I'm like, get fear out of my life.
Wow.
And yeah, once I addressed that fear, it really broke me free from a lot of things and just being more adamant about my life. And so I'm very grateful. I'm grateful for the platform that you've created for women. Once I decided to do this, I started listening to the podcast and I started listening to the women who had all these different types of amazing free unassisted births on their own autonomous birthing.
Mhm.
And I'm just like, this is something we can do. Like if you're sick and you need to, if you have an actual medical history, then you need to be smart about it and you need to go to the doctor and you need to get yourself monitored. But for a lot of women who are truly healthy and nothing's wrong, there's no reason you need to be running back and forth to an OB to manage your birth. There's nothing to.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I would even add actually that a lot of women that I know have already been risked out by the system, and they still want to have a normal birth, right? So that's
Yeah,
like the real shit, is that it's up for each woman to decide um, how they want to categorize themselves. Like
yeah, yeah.
I just interviewed a woman today who has tons of health issues, would never be able to find someone to support her in a normal birth, and she's free birthing, you
Oh
know,
wow. Yeah, yeah.
because it's up to each one of us to determine our own everything, our own assessments of our own, risk calculations.
Absolutely, absolutely. But it's just, this space that we are getting into. It could be scary, because what if God forbid they're like you're not allowed
Mhm.
to have an at home birth or autonomous birth. I mean, I
Right.
think from what I understand, they're trying to pass that legislation in India and say that you aren't allowed to birth on your own, and to to think that somebody has to manage this experience is just so heartbreaking. Now, again, some women are like, yeah, I don't care, let them manage it. But for
it's already illegal in a couple countries.
yeah, that's just insane. But I also say that if you want to do it, you so while I agree with you, Emily, on like the woman's autonomy to make that decision, I do feel like you do need to be properly educated. Simply from the point of growing up in this society, we don't even know our own bodies. So you just need to say, if you're going to say, I'm going to do an autonomous birth, just spend the time to educate yourself on what it means to just birth, right? Like
Well,
what your body is.
yeah, but again, I mean, I'm going to play devil's advocate to say a lot of women. What about the 15-year-old, that burst in the bathroom and didn't even know she was pregnant? Like, you actually
Yeah.
don't have to know anything, and
Oh, yeah,
babies
yeah.
will still. I've had women on this podcast who very intentionally didn't do research because they wanted to have. Um, they didn't want it to be a heady experience, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's kind of the point, really, is that every woman needs to find her own comfort of what she needs to have in order to feel comfortable. And
I
so,
see.
for you, it's whatever amount of research. For another woman, it's very little research.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
it's that's really what, to me, is that birth happens. And so if we're choosing an autonomous, self-authoritative, taking responsibility birth, then it's up to us to decide what we need in order to create an optimal um, container, in our hearts, minds, and spirits. And what's so fascinating is, through this podcast, I've interviewed women of all walks of life, of all different um, countries and different backgrounds. And a lot of women have actually told me, I didn't want to research. I just wanted to be in my instinct. And the cool thing about birth is that it will happen regardless of what you know in your head.
Mhm, mhm,
Right? And so even someone not knowing maybe all the stuff that you or I know, um, that doesn't equal that they would ignore an obvious complication, or that they would ignore, birth is an instinctual thing, right? So
mhm.
we don't actually, arguably have to know everything to still know how to respond in instinct,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know?
So I definitely agree with you on that because I know depending on certain things, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier with my husband, where he had certain questions, and I'm like, I just can't answer that. I just know.
Mhm.
That's the best answer that I can give you. I
Mhm.
just know. um,
Totally.
yeah, but I agree. I agree with that. With just being able to empower the women with birth. Like, I mean, I wonder what that really looks like. Like, if we were truly empowering women in everything, yet on their own terms, and especially with birth, what that would really look like, and what type of families and communities and society would look like from that.
Yeah. And I think something that we can do, and the women listening to this podcast, is not putting our own not putting the stuff that we needed to do to get comfortable with it on anyone else, right?
Yes, yes.
So even that, just for us to decenter ourselves in other people's lives, and, center the woman always in her own life. And when we do that, I mean, we can just do that with our friends, right? And that's something that has taken me a long time to learn how to do. And it's not how we're raised. And we're obviously so raised to be like just clouded in judgment and projection. And when we don't do that, and when we look at the sisters in our lives, um, and see them in their power, and see them in their self authority, and believe that they know best, even if they don't know they do, that will
Mhm.
be reflected to them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if that was a perspective that we all like you said, like if we all just had that perspective in this general society, that even women who may not feel that way, they would
Mhm.
know that they felt supported in the decisions that they made and could reach out easily
Exactly. Well, and that we
easily.
can do that. We can do that as our small communities, and it's contagious, and your story and sharing your story is a huge part of that, because so many women are going to hear this and relate to it. And I know so many women that have been abandoned by their midwives and doulas in labor. It's just heartbreaking, and
Mhm.
how that
Yeah,
informed your next pregnancy and the choices you made, so that you didn't have that experience again, and that you
yeah.
could birth, on your terms and your power, and then you did, right? So what a beautiful example
Yeah,
of
exactly, and I did it I mean, I wouldn't change anything. It was
Mhm.
just so quick. Now I will say as I was in it, I was like, "I can manage this." I'm like, "But I don't know if I can do this for 7 hours, but I can manage this."
Yeah, of course. Well,
But yeah, it was great. Thanks.
thank you so much. I'm happy we were able to do this. It was a long time in the making and came at the perfect time, and
It really did. Thank you so
yeah.
much. Again, just Emily, I just want to say from my heart, thank you for being the warrior goddess you are, and providing the space, and fighting for the space to for us to continue to utilize the space. And just I just send you so much love and strength and energy your way for continuing the fight for us.
Thank you. It's really felt, and I love having you in our community, and yeah, we just got to keep on keeping on. We're doing it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you. I'm very inspired by you.
Thanks.
That's it for today, everyone. Join us next week for another episode of the Free Birth Podcast. Thanks for joining us, and remember, your body, your choice. Lots of love.